memorials are expected all weekend long to honor Floyd's life, 5 years after an officer kneeled on his neck for nearly 9 minutes. Now, starting one of the largest protest movements in American history. Now, 5 years later, ex-officer Derek Chauvin has been convicted. He's serving a 22-year sentence in prison. And while there have been attempts at police reform just this week, the Justice Department rolled back some of those efforts. I want to bring in CNN anchor and senior national correspondent Sara Sidner, who joins us now from Minneapolis. And Sara, you helped lead CNN's coverage from Minneapolis after the killing of George Floyd. You're back on the scene today at George Floyd Square. What is it like?
Look, it is much more peaceful. It is much more quiet. But actually, this square, throughout the protests around the world and across Minneapolis, was mainly a place that was peaceful, where people came to remember, to commemorate, to mourn the life of George Floyd. And that's still happening to this day. And what is remarkable about this, because you, Omar, were here as well with me and have been to many of the places where people were slain by police officers unjustly. And this is different. And part of that is because this community decided they wanted to make sure they had a living memorial. And by that, I mean there are gardeners that come on a daily basis to make sure that the flowers and plants here survive. They make sure that this stays clean and pristine so that people can come here in a place of calm and cleanliness. But this is the area right here where you see George Floyd's face and all of those roses lying there, which say Remembrance 2025. That is where Derek Chauvin had his knee on George Floyd's neck. Police officer eventually murdering George Floyd and being convicted for that. Now, what's changed? There are several things that have changed. While this is still very much here, the streets are still closed off. Cup Foods, what used to be Cup Foods, now calling itself Unity Foods. They are the ones that called police on George Floyd. And then you have this neighborhood. And the issue here for a lot of people is they feel that the reforms that they wanted have not come to fruition. And so this isn't just a day about remembering and just a day about feeling sorrow, but also feeling hope. It is a day about demanding change, the change they want to see. And in so doing, what they are seeing from the Trump administration is the opposite, where he is rolling back the federal oversight on police departments. Here's what one longtime resident here of Minneapolis, who's been here from the 60s, here's what he had to say upon hearing what the Trump administration is doing.
In this neighborhood, we want police reform. I want to know that my grandchildren go down the street and a cop isn't going to just kill him because he's dark. Okay, my family is Creole, and I'm probably the latest, brightest in the whole of my family. Thank you. But at the same time, I have children and nephews, nieces with dark skin and nice hair, very nice hair. Okay, but it's not safe out here. You don't get a ticket and a bullet at the same time.
So you hear the sentiment there, and that is shared by quite a few people here. However, in talking with the mayor is saying, look, we are still going to make those reforms. We are still working through those reforms, even though the dissent decree from the Trump administration, from the federal government, has been pulled back. They are still working towards making a better community-oriented police department. And so you see that same tension that's here, but there is also a great deal on this day of love here. People feel like this is a homecoming, and they're coming from all over the country. We've met someone from Kansas City, somebody who came in from New Orleans, just to be here, just to remember the moment that the world saw happen because a 17-year-old live streamed it. And of course, the Floyd family also mourning their brother, mourning their cousin, mourning their uncle here today in Minneapolis.
Sara Sidner there at George Floyd Square in Minneapolis. Really appreciate the reporting.
5 years later, lessons have been learned, but the memory is still fresh after the murder of George Floyd sparked a nationwide movement.
And I remember at that moment, the level of excitement that people felt. It sounds crazy, but literally the excitement that people felt that they were taking the power back from the Minneapolis Police Department.
I look back 5 years, if there's things I would have done differently, I would have pushed harder and sooner at trying to dismantle some of the toxic culture that allowed that indifference to exist.
Across Minneapolis, hundreds of people gathered to remember Floyd's life and reflect on what has changed. CNN's Maribel Gonzalez explains what happens next as the city grows from the tragedy and the controversy.
With voices raised in song and flowers laid in remembrance, Minneapolis is marking 5 years since the death of George Floyd and the racial reckoning that followed. Protesters across the country called for an end to police brutality.
The change that we want to see has not come. Let's just all acknowledge progress on the issue of equity and basic human and civil rights. That's kind of an all or nothing proposition.
Now, new complications. Earlier this week, the Department of Justice halted its oversight of police reform in several cities, including Minneapolis.
Minneapolis is serious about our commitment to police reform, even if the President of the United States is not.
Derek Chauvin, the officer responsible for George Floyd's death, is currently serving 2 concurrent 20-plus-year sentences. A state jury convicted him of murder. He pleaded guilty to federal civil rights violations, netting him more than 2 decades in prison. Some conservatives are calling for a federal pardon.
Well, I think the reason that I'm advocating for the pardon is because Derek Chauvin is not guilty.
President Trump has not indicated he would pardon Chauvin. If it happened, Chauvin would remain in prison on state charges. Still, the idea frustrated Floyd's family as they struggle to move on.
We need people to hold police accountable. That's the bottom line.
I'm Maribel Gonzalez reporting.
Today marks 5 years since the murder of George Floyd set off a movement nationwide. But what has changed? Joining me now, Atlanta Journal-Constitution's race and culture reporter Ernie Suggs and Jason Lee, senior editor of Bossip. Gentlemen, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you.
So let's start here. I remember that video, and I'm sure many of us remember that video of Floyd's daughter, Gianna, saying, my daddy changed the world. And he did for a period. Question this morning, and what I actually started my 8 o'clock show with yesterday is, has the world changed back?
It has. And I look at it as kind of like Reconstruction. You know, all the progress that we made as black people after Reconstruction, which was pulled back after a while. And I think what we're seeing right now is a pullback. After George Floyd's murder, all the companies, all the corporations decided that we needed to do something to address systemic racism in this country. And now we're seeing this systemic pullback of all of that. So we're kind of regressing as a country because of, as a result of George Floyd.
And part of that regression is the backlash against that groundswell, that movement in the first place. You see things like Ben Shapiro offering a petition, putting out a petition to get Derek Chauvin pardoned from his federal conviction. And, it speaks to the, I guess, insidious nature of how people feel when they see black people fighting for justice, trying to get justice, and how deeply it can go to kind of, to your point, setting us back and kind of reversing things that we all took for, not maybe for granted, as this is how we should behave. This is how we should occupy space as a society.
I was looking in preparation of this conversation of some things that have changed that are not going to be reversed, right? We've seen the reversal of some of the consent decrees. We've seen the reversal of some of the commitments on DEI. Black Lives Matter painted down the middle of the street in Washington and New York and other cities. Those are gone. The only thing, as cynical as it sounds, that I've found that has changed and quite permanently is Aunt Your Mom and Uncle Ben off products, and the changing of names and things as superficial for many, not all, as that. And so what is the plan? Is there still the infrastructure that we saw 5 years ago socially to try to push for some of those changes? Does that still exist?
I think there are definitely people who are still fighting the good fight, and I think that people are still galvanized by these things because we haven't really stopped seeing big cases where police misconduct has become has been an issue. And so I don't think that people will necessarily stop that fight, but it is, I think, disheartening to a lot of people to see you need that motivation to be able to get out there and to protest and to fight these things. And when you see these reversals, it is going to be disheartening for a lot of people.
Yeah.